Thank you so much, Orly. And thank you for the introduction. So, real quick before we dive in and you have the conversation that we're going to have today, which I'm really excited for, just a couple of a little bit of level setting. So, as most of us know on this call, I assume, and if you are not aware, the CMMC rule is most likely to come out towards the end of this year or possibly beginning of 2025. And there is a very high bar or standard for, when you get through your CMMC, especially level two, which is in line with NIST 800-171, which is 110 controls, 320 objectives. It's a lot of work. So a lot of different organizations have questions about, well, how do we get compliant with this? How do we do that? And that's exactly what we're going to have that conversation today with an organization, Coco Singh. We have Michael here from Coco Singh, who's going to elaborate on how they actually got to 110 out of 110 for that requirement. So first and foremost, let me just introduce myself really quick. My name is Noelle Vestal. I am the compliance officer here at Prevail. We're an end-to-end encryption and email and file storage company. We are also now the first CSP to have FedRAMP equivalency from the DIBCAC. So it's another thing that happened recently. But enough about me. You are here to listen to these wonderful people talk. And I'm going to start first with Michael. If you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself and do a little quick intro.
Sure, appreciate it. My name is Michael Krager. I'm the Director of Information Technology for Kokosing. Kokosing is a Midwest and Mid-Atlantic based construction company. Several companies under the Kokosing umbrella in primarily heavy industrial and heavy civil construction. So think highways, bridges, pipelines, water treatment plants, etc.
Excellent. And like I mentioned, Michael was responsible for the compliance journey for your organization and getting that 110 out of 110. So we're going to have quite a lot of questions for you today. And I'm sure a lot of people in the audience have so many things I want to pick your brain about. But the other people I want to introduce real quick, first and foremost, we have Thomas Graham, and we also have Robert Teague from Redspin. So Redspin was the assessing organization. So Thomas, if you want to introduce yourself real quick.
Sure. Dr. Thomas Graham, Vice President, Chief Information Security Officer for Redspin, as well as being lead assessor for the majority of our engagements. Prior to that, I spent about 15 years actually being a DoD contractor, so I'm very familiar with what folks are going through. And I'm just happy I get to share the platform with Michael because, Michael, it seems like I haven't had a chance to chat with you in a while now, which may be a good thing.
Yeah, I agree with that, Thomas.
And last and certainly not least, Rob Teague, if you'd like to talk a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rob Teague. I'm the Director of CMMC Services at Redspin. I'm also one of the lead assessors and do a lot of the QA at the C3PAO level.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you all for joining me today. So let's go ahead and dive in. As we talked a little bit at the beginning, that level setting, we do have CMMC coming out most likely at the end of the year or at the beginning of next. Obviously, we're not sure exactly, but somewhere in that time frame. And we do, and that is going to solidify the requirement that already exists today in DFAR 7012 that references NIST 800-171 compliance, which is those 110 controls and 320 objectives that we discussed. One of the things that's going on right now with the DIBCAC and certified C3PAOs like Redspin and others is there is something called the JSVA. If you're not familiar with it, that is the Joint Surveillance Voluntary Assessment Program. What that is a joint venture between the DIBCAC, which is the DoD's assessment branch, and then certified C3PAOs like Redspin, who work together to get a CMMC certification that will essentially be a placeholder for when CMMC comes through. And please, Rob, Thomas, correct me if I'm wrong in that assessment, because you guys are the ones who've been in this significantly more than we have, obviously. At this current moment, there have only been 54 JSVAs completed, and one of those is Michael's company. So that congratulations to you. That is no small feat to be one of those 54. So if you could do us a quick favor, Michael, and let us know what was the need or the desire to become compliant at Kokosing?
Right. Well, thank you, Noel. So I joined Kokosing just over 2 years ago, and Kokosing had started down their path for CMMC compliance due to a number of DoD contracts that Kokosing had, ranging from work at Arlington National Cemetery to some work on some locks up in the Great Lakes. So the desire to keep, those engagements. The desire to be able to move forward and be more competitive in bidding on newer, DoD engagements was the big driver for Kokosin to become compliant.
And so and I believe that this is the case, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you were brought on specifically for the support of the compliance, correct, within the organization? Is that right?
That is correct. So I was brought on to get them to CMMC compliance as quickly as possible. Now, of course, as rules change, as they did right when I joined, that gave me the benefit of a little extra time. And
Yeah,
also
sometimes
some more
that's nice.
complexity. Correct. But
I-
yeah, I was brought on specifically, to get them CMMC compliant.
And I know that you have a background in some compliance as well. Is that right? If you could just touch on that a little bit as well.
So I spent my previous 25 years at JP Morgan Chase. So very used to the compliance environment around all the different government agencies, and specifically I ran branch technology for a lot of those years. So I'm used to the compliance environment. I'm used to a lot of the government compliance areas. So coming in and doing this was a natural fit.
Oh, that's excellent. And when you came in, so you have all this experience from, compliance. Obviously it's, financial, but it's again, compliance can very much, it's such a specific language type that you have to have for compliance. And I feel like it translates regardless of the industry. Do you feel like when you came to Kokosin, they were in really good shape? Do you feel like they had a lot of things sort of managed well? What was your overall impression when you first started 2 years ago?
The biggest difference in changing industries from a financial industry, which is very used to having technology at the forefront of everything they do,
Mhm.
to the construction industry where wasn't always such the forefront. Kokosin was off to a good start. They had some policies and procedures written up, but it was really education was a big driver, getting everyone to understand why we needed to do this, all the change that was going to be coming. So yeah, to say it was easy is a stretch. There was a lot of education behind it. So I see that as the biggest difference in this industry versus a financial world.
So do you feel like that was so the education piece of it? Did you struggle with the education piece at the executive level, or was it more? I mean, because it seems like in your situation, since they did hire you specifically for this, that exec level had a little bit more buy-in, maybe. But maybe I'm misreading that. Do you feel like everyone in the organization really understood how important this was?
Yeah, I got to make sure, are these guys watching? No, I'm just kidding. There were some misunderstandings overall about what CMMC was, what cybersecurity was, what the need for it was.
Mhm.
So I'd say there's education through all levels of the company as to cybersecurity in general and the need for it, and then a little deeper on CMMC and what that meant to the business going forward.
Yeah. And so do you feel like, I know you said that there were some policies and procedures that were already kind of developed in Kokosing. Do you feel like that was their greatest strength, or was there something else that you think really, sort of set you above and kind of gave you that little extra push in the beginning?
Coming in, that was a benefit to have a lot of those policies already written and ready to go. So yes, I would say that got off to a good start. Now we had to polish a lot of those, tweak some of those over the rule changes, and really as I alluded to, the biggest challenge is getting that out and educating company wide what those meant.
Yeah, and you hit on something that I think you are probably like the 10th or 11th person now I've talked to who's gone through like the full assessment who has said the same thing, which is that the education piece was one of the biggest struggles that you had. Do you feel like that was the case? Just getting everybody, like you said, even just level setting cybersecurity basic understanding, right? It seems like you were struggling with that a bit too, right?
Exactly, and yeah, education is by far the biggest challenge around this. Um, I'd like to say technology is easy. And if you're in the technology space, there's a lot of things that are easy to do once you get the backing and the buy-in and the funding to do it. And then getting everyone to understand what that actually means to that individual is the biggest challenge.
Yeah, that makes total sense. We have heard that from so many of our customers. Hey, these people don't even understand, that they can't click on this email because there's a link in it that they shouldn't be clicking. If you have employees like that who are not even understanding, when a phishing email is not a good idea, how are you supposed to explain to standard what somebody wants everybody?
Exactly.
That makes total sense. So you were there, how long did your entire compliance journey take? We're just gonna kinda dive into more of your approach. After you came on board, how long did it really take for you to get to that 110?
So after I came on board, we spent roughly 14 to 16 months going through all the existing policies, making sure that the the work, not only the words were there for the policies and procedures, but everything we had to do back that up. So it's really a lot of review, tweaking some of the policies, again, making sure everything that we said we were doing.
That's a big
And
one.
then, yeah, and then getting to a point where looking at it and said, we felt pretty good, but with some of the flux within the rulemaking and how the interpretation went, we still had not 100% certainty that we were going to go in and do well. But we got to a point where we were pretty comfortable in about 14 to 16 months in that time frame.
Okay. And so I know that obviously you were a part and you were leading that charge. How many people did you have on your team, aside from you who were assisting you with that?
A very small team to start with here at Kokosing, and the core team working on not only the policies, procedures, and the work for the systems behind that
Oof, yeah.
was really a core of about 5 people.
Okay. And that's including documentation and, like you said, the implementation side as well, right?
Correct. Correct.
Now, I know that you actually ended up going with an enclave approach. What was the reason for that? Why did you go in that direction?
We did start off not even considering an enclave approach,
Mhm.
due to how we were, and myself included, interpreting the famous 110. We're broadly interpreting that, and so we were approaching it as we need all of our companies, even the ones that weren't involved in DoD engagements, to be under this secure umbrella. As we went through and started, figuring out that here's where we really need to focus, and then enclaves became more attractive and more realistic to look at for CUI. That's when we really started to shift our thinking.
And so how many total employees does Kokosing have? And then how many did you actually keep in the enclave specifically?
So we have 1,850 what I call on network employees. A few thousand above that for out in the field. We estimated we would need about 200 people in the enclave just for those roles that had to deal with CUI and deal in specific jobs that were involved.
Yeah. And do you feel like that did really help with your overall success here, being able to limit the scope down like that from 1,800 to 200?
Absolutely. Anytime you can narrow down what you have to do, it makes it a lot easier not only to implement, but to educate and to sell. You have to get the budget to do it. So the bigger the number, the harder it is to do from all areas around. So yes, once you narrow it down and get to that enclave approach, it made it a great deal easier.
Oh, that's wonderful. And then did you have any issues with buy-in on the enclave approach? You said that, that was not actually the approach when you first got there. When you made that decision, was there any pushback there? And how did you manage that?
Interestingly enough, starting with the IT team, you started with my own team, we started broaching that. Well, this isn't going to fit. This isn't what we need to do. This leaves us a lot of gaps in a lot of other areas. So that was the first hurdle to get over, is getting the IT guys on board and girls to understand that this was the way to go. As far as beyond that and the teams involved and the executive levels involved, like I said earlier on, everything's about education. Getting them to understand what we needed to do and why this was the way to go is key.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'd say that all the time. Yeah. You've got to get everybody's buy-in or this doesn't work. Because to your point, it's not just IT. Like, you started with your IT, but then you branch out. Do you feel like this very much, even though you went the enclave approach and you had the 200 subset, do you feel like a lot of these things did become educational for the entire company as you were moving through it?
They're still educational through the company. We're not perfect by any means, but we're leveraging what we've learned through this process to become compliant, to help educate in other areas of technologies through the company. So,
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think that's a very important point to make, that, this really was the driver to get that education out there, right?
Can't stress it enough. Yes.
Yes, definitely.
If I can jump in real quick, Noel.
Yeah, please, Rob.
The other piece that Michael is kind of like leaving out is the fact that they are continuing to improve.
Mm,
So where they kind of got to, they've marked it more as a starting point now that they're compliant and certified, and now they're just building on top of that, which is phenomenal.
absolutely. No, thank you for mentioning
you,
that.
Robert.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
And
you can't rest on your laurels. As everybody knows, the cyber environment's constantly changing, and you have to change with it to stay ahead.
absolutely. And to stay safe and to keep the information safe. Yeah, you absolutely, like you said, you cannot rest on your laurels. That is so true. So the other thing that I found was very interesting is, and I want to ask you this question, even though I know the answer, but the audience doesn't. How many consultants did you work with in your compliance journey?
Myself, I worked with zero. Now, Kokosing, before I joined, shortly before I joined, they did have an initial assessment done by a third party that they had contracted with to see where they stood. And interestingly enough, that assessment did come in pretty close to a 110 out of 110.
Amazing.
Now, as we got into it, quickly realized, well, that wasn't
Maybe
really the
not quite
case.
so close.
Yeah, maybe not quite there. Early on in the process, a lot of misunderstanding of what the 110 was, and at that time it was the 110 plus.
Right.
Uh, so, but that was the only consultant we worked through,
Wow.
during our journey.
So like you said, you yourself actually didn't work with any consultants directly because that was before you got there, correct? Wow, that's amazing. So it was just essentially you, and so it was 5 people total on your team doing all of this?
That is correct.
Wow, that is amazing. For 200 users, that's quite impressive. So, you are obviously a Prevail customer with us, but, what was it that made you choose Prevail? Why did you come to us?
I'd be lying if cost wasn't a big factor. Um, cost was a big factor, as well as ease of implementation and ease of teaching a user how to use Prevail. It's a very simple user interface. It's a very simple system to implement. So that was a big attraction, and compared to other offerings out on the market, very attractive from a price point. So you put those together is pretty much a very simple decision to make.
Well, we're very glad that you did, obviously. And so do you think that choosing Prevail helped you let what you were saying, like the ease of implementation? Do you think that choosing Prevail over those alternative options that you had considered, do you think that that sort of gave you a leg up in this?
We did. I mean, it allowed us to move a lot faster, allowed us to get everything in place that we needed. Allowed me to, keep Robert and Thomas off my back for a long time to get this in place. But most of all, I got to stress that helped us move quick. Some of the other things we're looking at, such as a GCC high tenant from Microsoft, were just very, very time intensive, very resource intensive to implement. And as time is money, and we needed to get this in place quickly as possible. It was a perfect solution for us.
Ah, we love hearing that. And what was your timeline for implementation? Before you made a selection of Prevail, what was the timeline everybody discussed internally that you had to get this done and up and running?
Time we made the decision to go to a secure enclave. I'm sorry, we were really down to about less than 60 days.
Yikes, that is
Um,
fast.
and that's because we were looking at a lot of other things to do, a lot of other ways to approach it. We had our initial assessment, and one of our gaps was, how do we, do we go this route for a secure enclave? And so we spent a lot of time trying to decide the route to go and working through what the best route to go was when we came upon Prevail and said, yeah, this is the one to go with. And wow, we don't have a whole lot of time to do this. And again, it was a great fit because it's easy to implement, quick to implement, and met all of our needs. So
Yeah, makes total sense. And how long did it take for those two? So I assume those 200 users are in that enclave. How long did it take for those 200 users to get up and running, trained on Prevail, understanding, ready to go, ready to use?
We estimated we were going to be at about 200. So we're at about 125 now. Getting them onboarded once we train them. So we spent a couple of weeks of training, tweaking some of the Prevail documentation to fit our industry and our knowledge of our user base. You have to know your audience.
Absolutely.
After that, it's a very quick process for them to learn. So maybe 30 days total.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's also a good number for everybody in the audience. I'm sure there are people out there right now who are feverishly taking notes as you talk. So I'm going to take a minute and give you a break, Mike, and I'm going to move over to Thomas and Robert. So Thomas, Robert, you guys were very much a part of the assessment for Kokosing and looking at all of their documentation and looking at their implementation and everything else. So, can you say what was the benefit of, or was there a benefit? You guys are more familiar with the Prevail solution because we have had other customers you guys have worked with. Do you feel like that was a benefit as from an assessment standpoint when you came in to do the assessment here? And either one of you are welcome to answer.
Well, first of all, I just want to say, Noel, for the audience's awareness, Michael actually had a full head of hair, down to his shoulders before he started this process. And so as you can see,
I did.
much like myself, when the implementation, things change.
I see
So-
that. Yes.
So one of the benefits of using a solution like Prevail when you're undergoing an assessment, honestly, is from an organizational standpoint, it shifts some of the responsibility for some of the items to now that third party. And I know folks probably have heard of shared responsibility matrix and so on and so forth. Well, now with using Prevail, the folks that have the in-depth knowledge of the implementation, the configurations of the requirements on the back end, they're managing all of that for you. So now what Michael and his team, have to address is much smaller scale. And with using something, third party such as Prevail, the other benefit is ease of access, because if you have on-prem now, you got to do this, you got to do that. If folks are on the road, if they're at a client site, so on and so forth. Well, now with, what they've implemented, whether they're on the road, whether they're at a client site, or let's say even on a plane or, a train or in an automobile, I'm starting to sound like a movie tagline here. The protections around where that data is at, they're the same, from one place to another. Once you establish that connection, once you authenticate in, you have a level of assurance that no matter what alternative work site you're at, talking about a specific practice under CMMC and NIST 800-171, you have that warm and fuzzy that you're not going to have to deal with a potential issue accessing it from those locations. And Rob, I don't know if you have the same take or if you keyed on something different.
Yeah, no, obviously you can tell I don't do a lot of work because I have hair still. So, yeah. But Michael's kind of told you what the benefit of Prevail was for his organization. But on the flip side of that, as assessors, we had to do research on Prevail, which was, Noel, why we started to get to know you, Orly, Jamie, and everybody else on the team. And what a lot of folks may not know about Prevail out there is that you guys actually hired, I think, 2 separate 3PAOs to come in and do a FedRAMP ready assessment of your environment, right? So we had that conversation about that. You even provided the reports to us, because as we were getting ready to go in, knowing that Michael was going to be leveraging Prevail, we wanted to make sure that Prevail was meeting the requirements as well, because at the time you didn't have the equivalency. Since then, the equivalency is in place, so it makes it a lot easier for the assessors that follow. But we did notice that, once Michael got that moving, everything just kind of seemed to fall in place with him. And as Jamie said, from Prevail, that I didn't do anything for Michael. That is very true. He would send me emails asking me questions, and I'd be like, That's a great question, Michael. I can't give you the answer.
Absolutely. I try to get some
Uh,
stuff out of you, but
Yeah, but it just seemed, that easy lift solution plus the fact that, Thomas has pointed out, no matter where you are, you can access the data that you need. It just made sense. More importantly, as Michael was talking about, looking down the road, because they're leveraging this now environment, it is going to be so much easier to maintain going over the 3 years and beyond as the CMMC model continues to develop and change over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and thank you. Thank you both. Yeah. I think that's a really important thing to make sure everybody in the audience is aware is that, yeah, it is easier for the assessor if they are familiar with the solution you're using. I mean, it's just going to make their assessment so much easier. So thank you. The other thing I wanted to ask, Rob, I wanted to ask you this. So, can you describe what the assessment was like? What did you review? Was there any sort of, any moments that were like, really amazing or really terrible or anything that you think that our audience should know about?
Well, the first thing Thomas and I do when we start an assessment is break out the alcohol. Um, no, I'm just kidding. No, we went through their documentation. A lot of stuff was done very well. The big gotcha moment was when we found out they were still operating out of the commercial environment of O365. And then, this was really the first assessment that we did, which we've had multiple since, but it was like, okay, how do you break that news to Michael? you know, the environment that you're in is not compliant, and now you literally have to shift everything that you're doing, right? So that launched Michael into, as he's described, the conversations internally with his IT team, et cetera, et cetera. For us as the assessors, I want to say the stress wasn't there, but it was because we want to see our clients pass, right? So there's always that expectation, but it was more the fact that we had to provide that bad news to them, right? And
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
kudos to Michael and the whole co-coaching team, because they took it like champs. They were like, okay, well, no sense
Wow.
in crying over spilt milk. It's time to roll up the sleeves, as we say, and get to work. And that's exactly what they did. And like I said, once they did that, we came back out for the Delta assessment, and it was just ding, 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 ding. I think, Michael, we did it. We looked at all the gaps in the Delta assessment, probably spent an hour, maybe 2 at most. That's
so
how much quickly it went.
Oh, that's
I know it
fantastic.
took all the time I could use to do that through my poem. I ran up to the last minute to get it done.
Yes. So the average, and this is probably some information for a lot of the listeners. The average in that 180-day remediation period that we've seen, out of the assessments we've conducted, is probably right around the 3-month mark. Is where a lot of folks are just prior to that or just after it. But Michael leveraged the entire 180 days. I mean, he went up to the day. We booked the Delta assessment on the day. And you know what? When I reflected back on that, I was like, man, did he push the envelope or what? But then I thought, you know what? Michael is smart, because he leveraged all that time and then went back and dotted his I's and crossed the T's, made sure everything was straight. And like I said, when we did the Delta assessment, it was just a no-brainer. We looked at the new evidence, they screen shared all of the settings, boom, 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 done, done, done. So
That's an excellent point you just made. I mean, absolutely. Like, why only use 3 months? If you have 6 months and it's, like you said, and you can take that second 3 months and really make sure that you've got everything 100%. Because I mean, what would happen, Rob, for example, if, Michael and Kokosing did not have everything ready at that 6-month mark? What happens then?
yeah, well, then that would have been the second bad news we would have had to deliver, which is, sorry, Michael, Kokosing did not indeed pass this certification, and you failed to meet it during the remediation phase, which means you got to go start over. So back to the end of the line, clear the slate, start again,
Ugh.
which is
A- a-
something none of us C3PAOs want to see,
And I assume that your schedule is pretty packed. So if somebody did have to start at the beginning, they're probably talking, months and months and months of time to wait to do it again, I assume, right, Rob?
Yes, ma'am. Just for the listeners, just so everybody's aware right now, if you're trying to get into joint surveillance and you're not talking to a C3PAO, you're looking at after summer.
Yikes. So we're talking like 4 or 5 months out. Okay.
Mhm.
Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's actually, that's good for our listeners to know. We had heard that, it had been getting a little busy, but that's pretty booked up. Wow.
Yeah.
My goodness.
And kudos to the DibCAC team. Last month they were really kicking out 8 assessments, joint assessments a month.
Mhm.
Then they were still doing the C3PAO assessments because you still got to get
Yep.
more into the marketplace.
Absolutely.
They were still doing DibCAC highs. They had all these fronts they were operating on.
Wow.
So they brought on new assessors, trained them all up quickly, and then expanded the amount of assessments they're doing from 8 a month to 16 a month just to handle the load. Because
Wow.
the more as we're moving through joint surveillance, a lot more folks are jumping into the program.
Yeah, definitely. Makes sense. Thomas, did you have something you wanted to add to that too?
Well, I was just wanting to say, and I apologize, my allergies are bothering me today. As much as we've talked about with Michael and going through the assessment process, I want folks to understand, look, this isn't overall an easy process. Even during the assessment itself, not even the lead up, there's hiccups. There's hiccups in every single assessment that you go through. But what I want folks to understand is the thing that Michael mentioned that I don't think gets enough attention is he worked with his team. He's mentioned education several times, and whenever we come in and did the assessment, that was something that was very evident that when we ask a question, it wasn't dead air. It didn't seem like they were fumbling for an answer. And then once the initial assessment was over with, and to Rob's point, whenever we come back to do the closeout, much like during that initial assessment, every single question that was asked, they had a direct answer to. And for for full clarity, folks, when we come back and did the closeout with Prevail as now a part of the equation, the supporting documentation that you guys provided, Michael, and the evidence that he was able to show, yeah, it met the adequate and sufficient requirements under CMMC. So honestly, it was as Rob said, it was an hour or two, but it wasn't a very trying hour or two.
The other thing I would like to point out that Michael's kind of been touching on is the buy-in from the executive level.
Absolutely.
Everybody that we have assessed has leveraged that buy-in. Everybody that has passed the assessment, at least in our clients, have all leveraged that CEO down kind of enforcement or buy-in, if you will, which definitely greatly assists the folks like Michael when they're trying to explain why we need this. We got gigged on this. In order to fix it, it's going to take this, and with that buy-in, they understand why you're doing it. Along with that education piece, they really know why they got to do it. So that is very, very important. And I think that's the pivotal work, that training piece and that buy-in piece that Michael did that sets CoCoSing up for success.
Yeah, and those two pieces go hand in hand, right? I mean, obviously, if you train people, well, and you obviously did, Michael, so well done, they're going to have a buy-in. If you can let people understand what the benefits are, what the risks are for not doing it, and having them really understand that, the buy-in part's pretty easy, but it's that getting them to understand part that can be so difficult for so many different people. Those are excellent points. And Thomas, real quick, how long did the initial assessment take? And because we talked about the Delta assessment was pretty quick. How long did the initial assessment take?
So the initial assessment, please understand there's multiple phases to it. So the first phase, Michael and CoCoSing as the OSC, they provided us access to their documentation and artifacts up front. I want to say that was about a week or two prior to the actual interview sessions. So when they did that, we went through all of their documentation, all of their artifacts, and got a semblance of what they were doing. Now you get into the interview phase. The actual interview phase, I believe, was Monday through Friday, and that included an on-site visit, not only by ourselves, but also by the DCMA team. And then the back end, phase 3, that's reporting. Reporting generally takes a week right now. So if you're wanting an average, it's about 3 to 3.5 weeks per engagement is how long those 3 phases are taking.
Gotcha. So that's the full gamut from, when you start that, like you said, reviewing those documents all the way to the end when everything gets finished and finalized.
Yeah, so
Yeah, for the reporting phase, and that's on average. Now, can it take longer? Absolutely. It all depends on how the assessment goes and the ability of the organization to provide the needed information.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Rob, did you want to add anything to that?
yeah, so not really sure how other C3PAOs are kind of doing the rest of the joint surveillance. We don't get a lot of feedback on that. We only know the amount of C3PAOs that are participating so far, which is about half of the field. But the other piece that was kind of interesting in all of this is the fact that once we identified the gaps, we had conversations around that so that the team fully understood. I mean, it wasn't just us, it was DCMA, DIBCAC also explaining why they deemed it as, not met or trending not met. Once we got past all that and everything got into the POAM, off Michael went. And my last words to him were, hey, once you get this done, contact us and we'll set up the Delta. So for that phase 2 interview, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday was virtual. So we were not on site. It was all done just like this. Thursday was a travel day for Thomas and the DIBCAC teams. And then they arrived on site Friday and did the physical walkthroughs. Then when Kokosi went through the remediation phase, once he was done, he simply reached out to us and we set up another virtual meeting and then went over the Delta. So I think now that should be a clear picture for everybody on how it starts from the beginning all the way to the end.
Yes, thank you. And I know there are a lot of people, I get this question all the time. What does the joint surveillance program look like? What does the assessment look like? What is the process? So thank you. I think that's going to help a lot of people in our audience. So I have some questions that we actually got in preparation for this webinar, and I know we have about 20 minutes left, so I think it's probably a good time to dive into them. And there's a big one for Michael, so I'll start with Michael on this one. Michael, what was the biggest eye opener for you going through this process?
The biggest eye opener. I'd like to say get the lack of understanding around what CMMC meant, what cyber security meant, etc. Really drove me to think, well, this is IT driven, an IT driven program, and throughout the company when I joined, it was viewed as IT driven. When I quickly looked at it and came to realization that no, this is business driven, this is an IT driven. That really changed my thinking on how to approach this and got me into the education side, through that push. So yes, my biggest eye opener was that this is a business driven initiative. So any IT leaders that are listening in today, you have to embrace that. You have to communicate to your leadership, to the business leadership, that this is a business driven initiative and you're there, IT's there to help them be successful in getting there.
I think that was definitely my takeaway in my experience as well. And I've talked to quite a few other customers who have been in the same situation, who've gone through different types of assessments. And it seems pretty consistent that everybody comes to that realization at some point that this is not just IT. This is your entire organization. There are so many different pieces and parts that support. Yes, there is a lot of IT stuff, definitely, but there's also a lot of other things. And like you said, it is a business decision. It is a business related process. All these processes are part of, getting the business to be in a better place across the board, not just in IT. So that's an excellent point. So what do you think your greatest challenge was from a technological standpoint for for implementation of these 110?
technological standpoint, I don't know, I gotta be honest, there weren't a lot of major challenges. I don't
Yeah.
want to gloss over and make technology sound easy, but been doing it for a lot of years. So the actual mechanics of what you had to put in place from a technology perspective were fairly simple. The biggest challenge overall around the 110, so to speak, is what is CUI? Educating people on what CUI is.
Mm,
No, it's not just these three letters that if it's stamped on a doc, you have to pay attention to. It's like, what does that mean? Um, and and how you need to protect that. And it doesn't mean you can just spit stuff out on a printer and leave it sit for a couple of days and come back and get it later.
right.
Getting them to understand the importance of that, what it is, and that stuff that we do as a company could actually be CUIs, not just things that you receive. So from a
Right.
challenge standpoint, I'd say overall that was the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
And of course, it sound like a broken record, goes back to education.
No,
So
I love that you're saying that over and over again, because I'm hoping that people will walk away and go, you know what? Maybe I need to make sure everybody's educated about this. Maybe I need to do that. Because absolutely,
absolutely.
you're absolutely hitting on such a big point that, yeah, if nobody even understands what CUI is, then they're really not going to understand why they need to protect it. And they're definitely going to be more likely to be cavalier in protecting it. Oh, well, this isn't a big deal. It'll be fine. But you're right. If you give them that education, then hopefully they're going to actually understand that they are a part of the solution for protecting, conceivably national secrets. So yeah, that's fantastic. What was your biggest challenge in documentation specifically?
All of it.
We hear that a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. Um, I mean, like I said, from my past career, documentation was just ingrained in you. From a technology perspective, and anything new you did, anything you changed, that was just part of the process. Is make sure your documentation was in place and up to date. So coming to Kokosing, that wasn't an emphasis on the technology group. Prior to arriving, prior to CMMC, they started getting to that with CMMC, but continuing even today, driving forward with any and all documentation, not only putting down from a technical view what that documentation should look like, but also from a business side view. So you take the approach of whoever's reading that documentation needs to understand it regardless of if they're a technical member or a business side member. The challenge of writing that and pulling all that together is, I hate to group it all in one thing as all documentation, but it was all documentation.
But you know what, Noel? That was well said, Michael, because Noel and I have had this conversation about the
So many
documentation.
times.
And exactly what you just said, Michael, is the exact thing that we said.
Yep.
You've really got to Barney style it down so that the users understand. The assessors are going to understand, so you don't have to worry so much about them, but it's the users, because the users need to understand how they operate in and out of that environment. So that was an excellent point, Michael.
Well,
Absolutely.
one additional thing, Noel, we've been talking a lot about what it took Michael to get there. It was only kind of glossed over at one point in our conversation to this point. Now that he's there, he has to maintain it over the course of the next 3 years. So that's ensuring that the procedures are in place to update his documentation as they have the configuration changes, which occur in every environment, that they're updating what their configuration requirements are, that he's reporting his compliance every year per the DFAR 7012 requirements. It's not a one and done. This is something that he's gotten to, the first leg, if you will, in the race. Now he's got to maintain that because, oh, by the way, in 3 years, he's got to go back through it. So now when you're looking at it and you say, yes, we've been updating this at least annually, and I'm just throwing out a random example there. Okay, the assessors is probably going to say, all right, show it to me. And now Michael has to, and his team have to produce that evidence.
Yeah, you make such a good point, because I mean, I assume, Rob Thomas, you're not gonna, if you walk in, 3 years from now and Michael goes, I mean, we did it before. It's still there. I mean, it's in the documentation. Like, isn't that enough? I assume that's not going to work very well.
No, and the other piece that's floating out there, which we get tons of questions about, is NIST 800 171 revision 3,
Yes.
right? And when that's going to come into play with CMMC. By the time COCOSing comes down for recert, more than likely that new version is going to be in place. So as
Great
Mike
point.
stated earlier, cyber is constantly evolving and changing. So now they've got that start point. So now they got to flex it to meet the latest cyber requirements, the latest changes in the threat space, everything. So.
Absolutely true. That is such a good point. You're absolutely right. So yeah, there's always going to be some sort of change, and there's always going to be evolution. So you have to stay on top of it for a multitude of reasons. Not the least of which is if you don't stay on top of it, you're not going to be securing anything, which is the whole point. So exactly. Thank you so much, Thomas and Rob, for that. And real quick. So Michael, I know this is these are some of the big questions I'm sure everybody in the audience has for you specifically about your implementation for this. I know that obviously you use Prevail for your implementation for, for email and file storage. What other technological solutions did you use, like for things for like endpoint management and that sort of thing?
Through the process, we reevaluated everything we were doing, at COCOSing. So, we changed a lot of our endpoint solutions out. We changed, from hardware firewalls to, cloud-based. So we've done a lot of changes in that respect, some of them during this process and some of them quickly after. Some after because what we had was satisfactory, but as Robert and Thomas alluded to, you got to stay ahead of the game, so continuing evolving. So we moved to systems like CrowdStrike, just for, for a variety of reasons, best in breed, looking forward as to what could protect us better, what we could leverage better in the future, and what can help keep our costs down going forward.
That's a big one. Yeah.
That is a big one. Nobody likes to grow their IT team. They don't want to see a large IT team because, well, it's a cost center. We're not visibly making money for anybody. So you got to keep those things in mind. So what can you leverage to keep that low, but keep your protection where it needs to be, and keep it looking forward.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. Yes. Thomas, did you want to say something? I'm sorry.
No, I honestly, I was just sitting here trying to look pretty, but what Michael said is absolutely, correct. There is a constant push-pull, if you will, between IT and security and the overall organization, because if, as many folks on this call probably are well aware of, it's hard to show ROI, for some of the IT components, for some of the cybersecurity components, versus, sales where it's 1-to-1 or operations where it's a 1-to-1. And being able to, I hesitate to use the word, but I'm going to use it, but being able to streamline that a little bit is something that organizations that can figure that out seem to have a better progress towards meeting the individual items.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
And some of the other stuff, we talk with folks that ask us questions, for example, a SIM solution, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
How are you doing log correlation? Do we have to have a SIM solution? No, you don't. But at the end of the day, they're going to look like Thomas and Michael with no hair if you don't have something
a lot easier
correlating for them. But so to Michael's point, it's very difficult for IT leaders, especially today, right? Because you're on the hook for the responsibility of the security of the environment, right? You're also on the hook to find the right tools at the right price so it doesn't gouge the organization. You've got to find the tools that are easy for users, most important. And then the back end of that is for your administrators to be able to manage it without complicating things, having to send them to additional training. I mean, there's so many factors that play into this. That's why, a lot of people ask us about what's the quick button. There is no quick button. If you notice, Michael said it was like 14 months. that's all those decisions that are happening in that 14 months. It's not just applying the 110 practices, it's everything else behind that. That makes
That's such a good point. That is something I think a lot of people don't really think about in this timeline. A lot of reason why that timeline can be long is because of what you just said. You've got to find a solution that's compliant. Number one, it has to be cost effective. Number two, it has to be easy to implement. Number three, and it has to be easily trainable. Like you said, can you spin it up, with ease of use? Is it going to be something where it takes 6 months for everybody to learn it? Or is it going to be, 30 days for everybody to learn it? That's it. That is a very big factor to think about. You're absolutely
And,
right.
and let me help all the listeners, because Michael was reaching out to me asking all those questions. If you've hired the C3PAO to do your
Can't do that.
certification, they cannot give you that information.
He
As
can now, but
much
he
as-
can't then.
Right. As much as we want to assist, we don't want to be the cog in the wheel. Nobody wants to be a cog in the wheel, but there are clear lines drawn. And Michael at some point was like, what good is Rob doing me, man? He's not answering any of my questions. Just remember, that's why we cannot answer those. But
Very
Michael did
Exactly.
a great job.
And,
Exactly
and
Robert's
Noel
point.
I'm sorry, just real quick.
Yeah.
Noel, to you, one of the words you said, and you and I have had enough conversations where you've heard me say words mean something. You mentioned having compliance solutions. Well, one of the things from a technological standpoint, a lot of organizations still struggle with is the FIPS 140-2 validated cryptography.
Yep.
So being able to have a compliance solution, yeah, that's one checkbox, but you also have to have the understanding of implementing it in its proper configuration, because
Very true.
if you look at those validated modules on the NIST website, there's very specific configuration items that have to be in place. So for instance, you have Palo Alto, cool, great product. But if you don't implement it in the proper configuration per the validated certificate, well, you're going to have a firewall, but you're not going to be able to use it to show for confidentiality of CUI.
That's
So
an excellent point. Yeah.
having an understanding of those intricacies will help you a lot in the long run.
Yeah, definitely. No, thank you for mentioning that, because you're absolutely right. There are those little caveats in those validations. So if you're looking at buyer beware kind of situation, make sure that you are looking at that validated certification on the CMVP site. If you're not familiar with that, you can Google it, and like Prevail has one, for example, and it specifically states how to use it and how it has to be configured. So you're absolutely right, Thomas. Thank you for bringing that up.
I think the other thing Michael did that was very excellent was managing expectations of the leadership of CoCoSing.
That's a big one. Yeah.
Everybody wants the car that drives like a BMW, but you're operating on a budget where you can only purchase a Yugo. So keep that in mind, right?
That's a very
the
good
cheapest
point.
isn't always the best. Right?
Definitely. And I know we only have a few minutes left, but this is hopefully not the $1 million question, but for Michael, how much did your compliance cost at CoCoSing? And I know that this is not, we don't need individual items, but just a very ballpark over those 14 months. What was the ballpark of how much it cost, do you think?
I can give you a better idea around what my what I spend annually on cyber solutions.
Sure.
And CoCoSing is I don't want to say relatively small, but they're a large regional construction company, or about a $2 billion revenue company. And so we're under the $400,000 a year level on our annual cyber budget. So a portion of that, of course, was spent,
Was
on the
lumped in
compliance
there.
aspects of getting
Gotcha.
this, but not all of it. But that's about as close as I can give you based on how we keep our records here. But I did want to make one, I guess, a little plug for Robert and Thomas. In my past, I've had worked with a lot of auditors, a lot of people from the government coming in, and no matter how much I want to joke and tell people turn down the air conditioning in the room they're in, freeze them out, make them uncomfortable, so they get out of your place as fast as possible. The truth of the matter is you need to embrace it. You need to embrace these guys. You do need to try to get all the information you can out of them, which I did at times. But to help you do your job better and help you secure your better. So that's why I say embrace, your C3PAO and anybody else that comes in to help you get where you need to be.
And what do you think was the advantage because of the fact, like you said, you have that previous experience of dealing with auditors and assessors? What do you think the advantage was there? Like you said, embracing your C3PO. Do you think one of the advantages for you is that it wasn't as scary or, because you were used to it?
Definitely, and back to the education piece, that is one thing I told my team up earlier. You know, we have to work with these guys. They're here to help us identify things because we're not going to see everything. We don't know all the rules in the depth that they know. And so we need to leverage what they know to help us get better as well. So when I came here, it's an audit, it's an audit, it's an audit. It's the IRS coming in and they're going to throw you in jail kind of thing. It's like, that's not how you have to approach it. You have to approach it to, what and how can I help you secure your environment better?
Yeah, I think you hit on something right there. They are here to assist you in finding out the things that you need to do to get better. And I think that, I mean, as we can see here, Thomas and Rob are not scary at all. I don't think. At
For the
all.
most part, they're pretty good.
So, but you make a really good point because it's very understandable. I'm sure there's a lot of people in the audience who are kind of scared and apprehensive about this because it is something new and different and that can be scary. But to your point, just these people are here, like Rob and Thomas and other C3POs are here to assist you. Like Rob said, they want everybody to succeed. Obviously, they're not going to assist you in doing that, but they want that they're not trying to be there to be the bad guy and tell you you're doing everything wrong. They're there to be like, hey, look, you've done these things right. Good for you. Their validation. So yeah, that's an excellent part. And I know we only have a couple of seconds left. So I just want to thank, first of all, Michael, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story with us. I know this has been such an educational experience for everybody on this call. I know when I talked to you about all this stuff, it was very educational for me too, just to hear your experience. And as always, Rob, Thomas, thank you so much for bringing your expertise and your experience. I know you guys have done how many JSVAs now? So many.
If I can get off mute, I think we're at 18 now.
My gosh, out of 54, you've done 18. That's
Yeah.
impressive. So obviously you guys have a wealth of knowledge. So I just want to thank you so much for sharing that with us and the audience today as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. And Michael,
Yep.
again, congratulations to you and the whole co-coasting team. Nicely done.